The millionaire came to throw out the black woman, but everything changed when he saw her with triplets. Julian Cross didn't believe in second chances. At 34, he'd built Cross Capital into one of Chicago's most aggressive property investment firms by following one simple rule: emotions cloud judgment, and judgment is everything. Properties were assets, tenants were liabilities, and when liabilities stopped paying, you cut them loose. No exceptions, no mercy. So, when a small triplex apartment building on the south side landed on his acquisition list with one remaining tenant 6 months behind on rent, it should have been straightforward. Send the eviction notice, clear the property, renovate, flip, profit. He'd done it 100 times before, but that cold November morning, something made him decide to handle this one personally. Maybe it was the way his assistant hesitated when briefing him. Maybe it was the address, just 3 blocks from where he'd grown up before everything fell apart. Or maybe it was the universe telling him he needed to remember something he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. He pulled up to 1847 Ashland Avenue in his black Range Rover, the engine purring against the backdrop of a neighborhood that the ambiance and investment had left behind. The building was a 3-story brick structure, weathered but still standing, with boarded-up windows on the top, 2 floors, and graffiti crawling up one side like ivy. Only the ground floor apartment showed signs of life: curtains in the windows, a small potted plant by the door, children's shoes lined up neatly on the front step, 3 identical pairs of tiny sneakers, worn but clean. Julian sat in his car for a moment, studying the scene. He'd reviewed the file that morning. Tenant: Simone Harper, 29 years old, single mother, 3 sons. Rent, $1,200 per month. Months behind, 6. Total owed, $7,200 plus late fees. The math was simple. The decision should have been too. But those 3 pairs of shoes, so carefully arranged, gave him pause. He grabbed the folder from the passenger seat, stepped out into the biting November wind, and walked toward the door. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the cracked concrete. His tailored charcoal suit looked absurdly out of place in this neighborhood, where most people wore layers against the cold and the weight of just getting by. Julian raised his hand and knocked. 3 firm raps. For a moment, nothing. Then he heard it. Voices inside. Children's voices, high and excited, talking over each other. "Someone's at the door. Is it the pizza man?" "We didn't order pizza, dummy." "Don't call your brother dummy." The door opened, and Julian found himself looking at a woman who didn't match the image he'd created in his mind. Simone Harper stood in the doorway wearing a loose cream dress. She has a long, curly natural hair. She had warm brown skin, expressive dark eyes that held both exhaustion and wariness, and the kind of posture that said she'd been bracing for bad news for so long it had become her default stance. But what stopped Julian cold wasn't Simone. It was the 3 identical faces peering out from behind her legs. 3 boys, maybe 4 years old, with the same big brown eyes, the same round cheeks, the same curious expressions. They looked at him with a kind of unguarded interest only children possess, the kind that hasn't yet learned to fear strangers in expensive suits carrying folders. Triplets. The word from the file suddenly became real, became 3 separate human beings with distinct expressions despite their identical features. One smiled shyly. One looked serious, studying Julian like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. The third waved. "Can I help you?" Simone's voice was steady, but Julian caught the slight tremor underneath. She knew why he was here. She'd probably been expecting this visit for weeks. "Ms. Harper?" Julian kept his tone professional, neutral. "My name is Julian Cross. I'm with Cross Capital. We recently acquired this property, and I'm here to discuss the status of your tenancy." Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by resignation. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "I know I'm behind," she said quietly. "I've been trying to catch up. I just need a little more time." Julian had heard every version of this speech. He'd learned to let them roll off him like water off stone, but something about the way she said it, the way her voice dropped so the children wouldn't hear the desperation underneath, made the practiced response die in his throat. "Can we discuss this inside?" he heard himself ask. "It's cold out here." Simone hesitated, clearly torn between letting a stranger into her home and having this conversation where her children could overhear everything. Finally, she stepped back. "Boys, go play in your room for a minute. Mama needs to talk to this gentleman." "But Mama," one of the triplets started. "Elijah, now please, take your brothers." The serious one, Elijah, nodded and herded his brothers down a narrow hallway. But Julian caught them peeking around the corner, 3 pairs of eyes watching everything. Simone gestured to a small living room that was crowded but meticulously organized. A worn couch faced an older television. Plastic bins of toys lined one wall, labeled in neat handwriting. Cars, blocks, books. The carpet was old but vacuumed. Everything was clean, arranged, loved. This wasn't the apartment of someone who'd given up. This was the home of someone fighting with everything they had. "Please sit," Simone said, though she remained standing, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Julian sat on the edge of the couch, setting his folder on the coffee table. He could feel the weight of her anxiety, the way she was preparing herself for the worst. "Ms. Harper, I'm going to be direct with you," he began. "You're 6 months behind on rent. That's $7,200, not including the late fees and penalties. Outlined in your lease agreement, my company has legal grounds to proceed with immediate eviction." Simone's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "I understand that, but I also understand that I have rights as a tenant. Illinois law requires—" "I'm aware of Illinois tenant law," Julian interrupted, not unkindly. "And you're right, the process would take time, but it would end the same way." "So you're here to throw us out," Simone said flatly. "I'm here," Julian corrected, "to understand the situation." That seemed to surprise her. Her arms loosened slightly. "Understand what?" "Why you're 6 months behind. What changed?" Simone laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want the sob story? Fine. I worked as a medical billing specialist at Mercy Hospital. Good job, decent pay, benefits. I could afford this place, childcare, everything we needed. Then the hospital downsized and my entire department was eliminated. That was 8 months ago." She moved to the window, looking out at the street. "I applied for unemployment, started job hunting. But every interview, same question. Do you have reliable childcare? Daycare for triplets costs more than most entry-level positions pay. I've been doing freelance billing work from home, but it's not consistent. Some weeks I make $400. Some weeks I make $80. Julian made notes on his tablet, but he was really watching her reflection in the window, the way her shoulders had dropped when she mentioned her children. "What about family?" he asked. "Support system?" "My mother died when the boys were 2, Simone said quietly. "Breast cancer. She was my childcare, my backup, my everything. Their father—" She paused, and Julian saw her jaw clench. "He left when I was 6 months pregnant. Said he didn't sign up to be a father to 3 kids at once. I haven't heard from him since." One of the triplets appeared in the doorway, the one who'd waved earlier. He was clutching a toy truck and looking at Julian with open curiosity. "Mama, can we have a snack?" Simone's expression softened immediately. "In a minute, baby. Mama's talking." "But Caleb's hungry, and Isaiah keeps taking my truck." "Then Isaiah needs to give it back. Go tell him Mama said to share." The little boy nodded and disappeared, but not before giving Julian one more curious look. Simone turned back to face him. "Mr. Cross, I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking you to forgive the debt. I'm asking for time. I have 3 interviews lined up this week. One of them is for a position with remote flexibility. If I get it, I can catch up on everything I owe plus current rent. I just need 60 days. Julian looked down at his folder, at the numbers that made this a simple business decision. Then he looked at the toy bin labeled books in a mother's careful handwriting, at the 3 pairs of shoes by the door, at the woman standing in front of him who just laid out her entire situation with the kind of dignity that made him feel small for even considering what he'd come here to do. "What are their names?" he asked suddenly. Simone blinked. "What?" "Your sons. What are their names?" She studied him for a moment, trying to figure out if this was a trick question. "Elijah, Caleb, and Isaiah. They just turned 4 last month." "Which one was that?" Julian nodded toward the hallway. "Caleb, he's the social one. Isaiah's the wild one, always getting into something. And Elijah—" She smiled slightly. "Elijah's the protector. He takes care of his brothers, tries to take care of me. He's 4 years old and already worried about things a child shouldn't have to think about. Something cracked in Julian's chest, a small fissure in the armor he'd spent 15 years building. He stood up, and Simone immediately tensed, preparing for the final blow. "Ms. Harper," he said, "I'm going to be honest with you. Everything you've told me, every circumstance you've described, I've heard versions of it before. And in every case, I've proceeded with the eviction because that's how business works. That's how you protect your assets and your bottom line." Simone's face went carefully blank, the way people's faces do when they're preparing to absorb bad news without falling apart. "But," Julian continued, and he saw her eyes flicker with cautious hope, "I'm not going to do that today." "What?" "I'm not going to evict you," he said again. "Not today, not this week. I'm going to give you the 60 days you asked for." Simone's hand went to her mouth. "Are you serious?" "On 2 conditions," Julian said. "First, you keep me updated on your job search. If you get an interview, I want to know. If you get an offer, I definitely want to know. Second, you let me send someone to assess the building, not for the eviction process, but because I noticed some things on my way and that need attention. The heating system, the windows, some structural issues. I want to make sure this place is safe for you and your sons." Simone stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Julian picked up his folder and slid a business card across the coffee table. His personal cell number was written on the back. "Because," he said quietly, "a long time ago, I was a kid living in an apartment not far from here. My mother was behind on rent. And when the landlord came to evict us, nobody gave us 60 days. Nobody gave us anything. We ended up in a shelter for 6 months. Simone's eyes widened. "I built my entire career on not being that desperate again," Julian continued, "on never being in a position where someone else held all the power over whether I had a roof over my head. But somewhere along the way, I became the person holding that power over other people. And I'm not sure I like who that makes me." He moved toward the door, then paused. 60 days, Ms. Harper. Make them count." "Mr. Cross," Simone's voice stopped him. When he turned back, her eyes were bright with tears. She was fighting to hold back. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Julian said, "which is why I'm doing it." As he reached for the doorknob, a small voice called out, "Mr. Julian turned to find all 3 boys standing in the hallway, having clearly been listening to everything. Elijah stood in front, with Caleb and Isaiah flanking him like tiny bodyguards. "Are you going to make us leave?" Elijah asked, his voice small but brave. Julian crouched down so he was at their eye level. 3 identical faces looked back at him with a mixture of hope and fear that was far too adult for 4-year-olds to be carrying. "Not today," Julian said gently. "Your mama's got some time to figure things out, and in the meantime, I'm going to make sure your apartment is warm and safe. Does that sound okay?" Isaiah, the wild one according to Simone, suddenly stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Julian's neck in an enthusiastic hug. Julian froze, completely unprepared for the small body pressed against him, the absolute trust in that gesture. "Isaiah!" Simone moved forward quickly. "I'm so sorry. He doesn't understand boundaries." "It's okay," Julian said, and he was surprised to find he meant it. He awkwardly patted the little boy's back. "It's fine." When Isaiah finally let go, Caleb shyly offered Julian the toy truck he'd been holding. "You can borrow this if you want. It's my favorite." Something about that gesture, the willingness to share what was precious, made Julian's throat tight. "That's very kind of you," he managed, "but I think you should keep it. Take care of it for me, okay?" Caleb nodded solemnly, like Julian had just given him an important mission. As Julian walked back to his Range Rover, he could feel Simone and her 3 sons watching from the doorway. He didn't look back. If he'd looked back, he might see the gratitude on her face, and that would make what he'd just done feel too big, too complicated. He'd just broken his cardinal rule. He'd let emotion influence a business decision. And somehow, sitting in his car and pulling away from 1847 Ashland Avenue, Julian Cross felt more like himself than he had in 15 years. Julian didn't go back to his office immediately. Instead, he drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Simone's apartment and sat in his car staring at his phone. He should call his business partner, Marcus Webb, and explain the decision. He should call his attorney and have them draft a formal 60-day extension agreement. He should do all the logical, professional things that would protect the company and document this deviation from standard procedure. Instead, he pulled up Simone Harper's file again and started reading more carefully this time, not as a landlord reviewing a delinquent tenant, but as someone trying to understand a life. The lease had been signed 3 years ago, just after her mother passed away. The previous landlord had noted in the file that Simone was a model tenant always, on time, keeps property immaculate. There were copies of her employment records from Mercy Hospital showing steady income and excellent performance reviews. One supervisor had written, "Ms. Harper consistently exceeds expectations and demonstrates exceptional attention to detail. She would be an asset to any organization." Then, 8 months ago, everything changed. The hospital downsized. The severance package was minimal. The unemployment benefits barely covered groceries, let alone rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in a building that, despite its condition, was still in a neighborhood where landlords could charge market rates. Julian kept scrolling. There were copies of job applications, dozens of them, medical billing positions, administrative roles, customer service jobs, all rejected or never responded to. Several had notes in Simone's handwriting in the margins. Requires on-site 9 to 5, no flexibility. Daycare cost would exceed salary. Position filled before interview. She'd been trying. That much was painfully clear. His phone buzzed. Marcus. "Where are you?" His partner's voice came through, professional and slightly impatient. "We have the Riverside property meeting in 20 minutes. "I'm handling something," Julian said. "Can you take the meeting without me?" There was a pause. Marcus Webb had been Julian's business partner for 5 years, and in that time, Julian had never missed a meeting, never delegated something important, never been anything other than completely focused on the business. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, concern creeping into his voice. "I'm fine. I just need to take care of something. I'll fill you in later." "This is about that Southside property, isn't it? The triplex with the tenant situation?" Julian hesitated. "Yeah. Did you serve the eviction notice?" "Not exactly." Another pause, longer this time. "Julian, what did you do?" "I gave her 60 days. "You what?" Marcus's voice shot up. "We talked about this. That property is part of the West Loop expansion package. The buyer wants it cleared and ready for renovation by January 1st. That's 5 weeks away, not 60 days. "Then we'll renegotiate the timeline with the buyer," Julian said calmly. "On what grounds? Because you suddenly developed a conscience?" The words stung because they were accurate, but Julian kept his voice level. "On the grounds that we're not going to throw a single mother and her 3 4-year-old sons onto the street right before Christmas." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You met her." "I met her. And the kids." "Triplets, they're 4. Marcus sighed, the sound of someone who knew he was fighting a losing battle. "Julian, man, I get it. I do. But this is a business. We can't operate on feelings. We have investors, contracts, obligations." "I know all that," Julian interrupted. "And I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm telling you what I decided. 60 days. We'll adjust the closing timeline or find another property for the West Loop package." There was a long silence. Then Marcus said quietly, "This isn't like you." "I know. So what changed?" Julian looked back at the building where Simone and her sons lived, at the small potted plant by the door that someone was keeping alive despite everything else falling apart. "I remembered something I'd forgotten," Julian said. "I'll explain later. Handle the Riverside meeting. I'll be back in the office this afternoon." He hung up before Marcus could argue further. For the next hour, Julian sat in that coffee shop parking lot making calls. First to a property inspector he trusted, arranging for a full assessment of 1847 Ashland Avenue. Then to a heating contractor, because he'd noticed the ancient furnace in the building's basement and knew it wouldn't last through a Chicago winter. Then to his attorney, drafting a formal rent extension agreement that would protect both Simone and the company. By the time he finally headed back to his office, it was nearly noon, and he'd committed roughly $15,000 of company money to repairs on a property they were planning to sell anyway. Marcus was going to kill him. Julian's office occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in the West Loop, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Chicago skyline. Cross Capital had grown from a one-man operation in Julian's studio apartment to a firm managing a portfolio worth $45 million, and the office reflected that success. But as Julian walked through the sleek, modern space, past the employees working at their minimalist desks, he felt strangely disconnected from it all. Like he'd built something impressive but hollow. Marcus was waiting in Julian's office, sitting in one of the leather chairs facing the desk with his arms crossed. At 36, Marcus was 2 years older than Julian, with close-cropped hair starting to show gray at the temples, and the kind of calm, analytical demeanor that balanced Julian's intensity perfectly. They'd met at a real estate investment conference, discovered they had complementary skills, and built Cross Capital together from the ground up. Marcus was more than a business partner. He was the closest thing Julian had to family, which was why the look of concern on Marcus's face hit harder than anger would have. "Before you say anything," Julian started, closing the door behind him, "I know how this looks." "Do you?" Marcus asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you just tanked a $2.3 million deal because a single mom asked nicely. It's more complicated than that." "Then explain it to me." Julian moved to the window, looking out over the city. "Do you know where I grew up?" Marcus blinked at the sudden shift. "South Side, right? You mentioned it once." "Englewood. My mom worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, trying to keep us afloat after my dad left. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that cost $800 a month, which might as well have been $8,000 for how hard it was to scrape together." Julian could feel Marcus watching him, but he kept his eyes on the skyline. "I was 11 when she got laid off from her day job. She tried to make it work on just the night shift at the gas station, but it wasn't enough. We got behind on rent. First 1 month, then 2, then 3. The landlord, this guy named Kozlowski, he didn't care that my mom was working herself to death. He just wanted his money. Julian, he came to our door one night with an eviction notice. I remember my mom begging him for more time. She had 2 job interviews lined up. She just needed a few weeks. But Kozlowski said business was business. We had 72 hours to get out." Marcus's expression softened. "I didn't know." "We ended up in a shelter on Wabash for 6 months, shared a room with 3 other families. My mom worked during the day and came back to that shelter every night, and I watched her break a little more each time. She finally got us out, got us into a better place, but something had changed in her. She was different after that, harder, more afraid." Julian finally turned to face Marcus. "This morning, when I knocked on Simone Harper's door, I saw my mother's face looking back at me, and standing behind her were 3 little boys who reminded me of the kid I was, the one who didn't understand why we had to leave the only home he'd ever known." "So you gave her 60 days, Marcus said quietly. "So I gave her 60 days. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he stood up and moved to stand beside Julian at the window. "You know this is going to cost us," he said. Not angry, just factual. "I know. The West Loop buyer might walk. Then we'll find another buyer. The board is going to have questions." "Let them ask." Marcus shook his head, but there was the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. 5 years I've been your partner, and this is the first time I've seen you make a decision with your heart instead of your head. Is that a problem? Honestly?" Marcus clapped a hand on Julian's shoulder. "It's about damn time." That evening, Julian found himself driving back to the South Side. He told himself it was to drop off the rent extension paperwork Simone needed to sign. He told himself he wanted to confirm the property inspector could access the building the next day. But really, he just wanted to make sure they were okay. It was nearly 6 p.m. when he pulled up to 1847 Ashland Avenue. Through the front window, he could see warm light and movement. The sound of children's laughter drifted out into the cold November air. Julian sat in his car for a moment, suddenly feeling foolish. He had no reason to be here. Simone had his number. She could call if she needed anything. But then the front door opened, and Elijah stepped out onto the small porch. He was wearing a jacket too thin for the weather, carefully carrying a bag of trash toward the bins at the side of the building. The sight of a 4-year-old taking out trash in the dark because he was probably trying to help his mother made Julian's chest tighten. He got out of the car. "Elijah, right?" The boy turned, eyes widening when he recognized Julian. "You came back?" "I needed to drop off some paperwork for your mom." Julian walked over and took the trash bag from Elijah's hands. This is pretty heavy. Let me help. I can do it, Elijah said, a little defensively. I help Mama all the time. I bet you do, Julian said gently. But there's no rule that says you can't accept help when someone offers. Even superheroes have partners. That seemed to satisfy Elijah. He watched as Julian carried the trash to the bins, then followed him back toward the door. Are we really going to get to stay? Elijah asked suddenly. His voice was small, uncertain. For real? Julian crouched down again, the way he had that morning. For real. I promised your mama 60 days, and I keep my promises. 60 days is a long time, right? 2 months, Julian confirmed. Elijah nodded, processing this. Then, quietly, Isaiah has bad dreams sometimes, about us having to leave and not having anywhere to go. He wakes up crying. The matter-of-fact way he said it, like it was just another thing a 4-year-old should have to deal with, made Julian's throat tight. Well, you can tell Isaiah that's not going to happen, Julian said firmly. Not while I have anything to say about it. The front door opened and Simone appeared, wrapped in a cardigan, her expression shifting from worry to surprise when she saw Julian. Mr. Cross, is everything okay? Everything's fine. Julian stood up quickly, suddenly aware of how this must look, him crouching in her front yard talking to her son. I just came by to drop off the extension agreement. I should have called first. Elijah, baby, come inside where it's warm, Simone said, but her eyes stayed on Julian. Elijah ran past his mother into the house, calling out to his brothers that the nice man came back. Simone stepped onto the porch, pulling her cardigan tighter against the cold. You didn't have to come all the way out here. You could have emailed it. I know, Julian pulled the folder from his car. I wanted to make sure you understood everything in the agreement, and I scheduled a property inspector for tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., if that works for you. An inspector? Just to assess what repairs need to be made, the furnace, the windows, some water damage I noticed in the upper floors. I want to make sure this place is safe. Simone studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? It was the second time she'd asked him that question. Julian still wasn't sure he had a good answer. Because I can, he said finally. Because I have the resources and the power to make a difference, and for once, I want to use them for something that matters. We matter? Simone asked softly. You matter, Julian confirmed. Something shifted in her expression, a wall coming down just slightly. Would you like to come in? I made chili. It's not fancy, but there's plenty. Julian knew he should say no. He should maintain professional boundaries, drop off the paperwork, and leave. But he found himself nodding. I'd like that. The apartment felt different in the evening light, warmer somehow. The 3 boys were at the kitchen table, which was set with mismatched bowls and a stack of paper towels serving as napkins. They looked up when Julian entered, and 3 identical faces broke into smiles. You're staying for dinner, Caleb exclaimed. If that's okay with your mom, Julian said. It's okay, Simone said, pulling out an extra bowl from the cabinet. Boys, make room for Mr. Cross. Julian found himself squeezed onto a chair that was definitely meant for someone smaller, his knees hitting the underside of the table. Isaiah immediately scooted his chair closer, chattering about a cartoon they'd watched that afternoon. Elijah watched Julian quietly, still sizing him up, and Caleb kept offering to share his crackers, placing them carefully on Julian's napkin, with the kind of generosity that came naturally to children who hadn't yet learned to guard what was theirs. The chili was simple, but good, and the conversation was chaotic in the way that only dinner with 3 4-year-olds could be. Everyone talked over everyone else. Questions were asked and forgotten before they could be answered. Someone spilled water, and there was a brief debate about whose fault it was before Simone gently redirected them to focus on cleaning it up rather than assigning blame. Julian couldn't remember the last time he'd sat at a table like this. His meals were usually eaten alone in his penthouse, reviewing reports on his tablet, or at business dinners where every conversation had an agenda. This was different. This was life, messy and loud and real. Mr. Cross, do you have kids? Isaiah asked suddenly. Isaiah, that's not polite, Simone started. It's okay, Julian said. No, I don't have kids. Why not? Caleb asked with the beautiful directness of a child. I guess I've been too busy with work, Julian said. That's sad, Isaiah declared. Kids are fun. You are fun, Julian agreed, surprising himself with how easily the words came. After dinner, while Simone cleaned up despite Julian's offers to help, the boys showed him their room. It was small, with 3 twin beds crammed in and barely enough space to walk between them, but every inch was used efficiently. Toys were organized in bins. Books were stacked neatly on a shared shelf. Above each bed was a piece of construction paper, with the boy's name written in marker and decorated with stickers. "Mama made those," Elijah said, pointing to the name signs. "So, we remember which bed is ours." "Can you tell which one is which without the signs?" Julian asked, curious. All 3 boys giggled. "We can," Caleb said, "but sometimes we trick Mama and sleep in different beds." "She always knows, though," Isaiah added. "Mamas are magic like that." When Julian finally left that evening, it was nearly 8:30. Simone walked him to the door while the boys got ready for bed, their voices carrying down the hallway as they argued about who got to choose the bedtime story. "Thank you for staying," Simone said. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Julian said honestly. "Your boys are amazing." "They are," Simone agreed, her expression softening. "They're what keeps me going. When everything else feels impossible, I look at them and remember I don't have the luxury of giving up." "For what it's worth," Julian said. "I don't think you're the giving up type." Simone smiled, really smiled, for the first time since he'd met her. "You don't know me well enough to know that." "Maybe not yet," Julian said, "but I'm starting to." As he drove back to his penthouse that night, Julian realized something had fundamentally shifted. He'd gone to 1847 Ashland Avenue that morning, planning to solve a business problem, but sitting at that crowded table, listening to 3 little boys talk over each other while their mother gently guided the chaos, he'd found something he didn't know he'd been missing: purpose, connection, home. And for the first time in 15 years, Julian Cross wondered if maybe building an empire wasn't the only thing worth doing with his life. The property inspector's report arrived 3 days later, and it was worse than Julian had anticipated. He sat in his office reviewing the document with growing concern. The furnace wasn't just old, it was a safety hazard, leaking carbon monoxide at levels that could be dangerous with prolonged exposure. The electrical system in the upper 2 floors was completely shot, a fire waiting to happen. The roof had significant water damage that had spread to the structural beams. And the plumbing, the inspector noted in bold red letters, was catastrophically outdated and likely to fail within the next 6 months. The estimated repair cost $87,000 for a property they'd purchased for $340,000 and planned to flip for maybe $450,000 after renovations. This was a disaster. The profit margin had just evaporated. Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding his own copy of the report. "Please tell me you're reading what I'm reading and coming to the same conclusion I am." "Which is?" Julian asked, though he knew exactly where this was going. "That we cut our losses. We give Ms. Harper the 60 days as promised, help her find alternate housing, and we sell this property as is to a developer who specializes in teardowns. We might break even, but at least we're not pouring $100,000 into a money pit." It was the smart business decision. Julian knew it. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. But 6 months ago, he hadn't sat at a kitchen table with 3 4-year-old boys who'd shared their crackers and their stories, like he was someone who mattered. "What if we do the repairs anyway?" Julian asked. Marcus stared at him. "You're joking. The carbon monoxide alone is a liability. If something happened to that family because we knew about the furnace and didn't fix it, then we relocate them during the 60-day extension," Marcus interrupted. "We put them in corporate housing, we do the repairs, and then we sell." "But Julian, man, you're talking about investing nearly $100,000 into a property we're not keeping. That's not business, that's charity." "Maybe it's both," Julian said quietly. Marcus closed the door and sat down across from Julian's desk. "Okay, I need you to level with me. What's really going on here? Because this isn't about the property anymore. This is about her, isn't it?" Julian looked up sharply. "It's not like that. Isn't it? You've been to her apartment 3 times this week. You stayed for dinner. You're making decisions that don't make financial sense because of a woman you barely know. I'm making decisions because there are 3 children living in a building with a carbon monoxide leak," Julian corrected, "and because I have the resources to fix it." At what cost? Marcus asked. Julian, I supported you on the 60-day extension. I backed you when you wanted to do basic repairs. But this? He held up the inspector's report. This is going to eat into our operating budget for the next quarter. The board is already asking questions. And if word gets out that Cross Capital is in the charity business, every tenant behind on rent is going to expect the same treatment. Julian knew Marcus was right. Every point he was making was valid from a business perspective. But something had shifted in Julian over the past 3 days, something he couldn't quite articulate, but felt bone deep. Do you remember why we started this company? Julian asked. Marcus frowned. To make money, to build something that would last. No, before that, the very beginning. We were at that conference in Detroit, and you asked me why I wanted to get into property investment. Do you remember what I said? Marcus thought for a moment. You said something about creating stability, about making sure people had safe places to live. I said I wanted to be the kind of landlord I wished I'd had growing up, Julian said. Someone who saw tenants as people, not just revenue streams. We built this company on that principle, but somewhere along the way, we forgot it. I forgot it. So this is about easing your conscience? This is about remembering what we're supposed to be doing, Julian said firmly. Yes, we need to make money. Yes, we have investors and obligations, but we also have an opportunity to actually help someone, to make a real difference in people's lives, and I don't want to walk away from that just because it's not the most profitable decision. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying Julian's face. Then he sighed. You know, my wife said something to me last night. I told her about the situation, and she said, maybe Julian's not losing his edge. Maybe he's finally finding his heart. Julian felt his throat tighten. Do the repairs, Marcus said. I'll figure out how to sell it to the board. But, Julian, you need to be clear about what this is. Are you helping a tenant, or are you getting involved in something more complicated? I don't know, Julian admitted. Right now, I'm just trying to make sure 3 little boys don't get sick from the carbon monoxide. Okay, Marcus stood up. But when you figure it out, we need to have another conversation. Simone was at the kitchen table with her laptop when Julian called that afternoon. She'd been staring at the same email for 20 minutes, reading and rereading the words, afraid that if she looked away, they might change. Dear Ms. Harper, we are pleased to offer you the position of Remote Medical Billing Specialist with Medicare Solutions. Your start date would be December 1st, with a salary of $52,000 annually plus benefits. She'd gotten the job. After 8 months of applications and rejections, after interviews where she'd had to explain the gap in her employment and the complications of being a single mother to triplets, after nights lying awake wondering how she was going to feed her children next week, she'd finally gotten a job offer. A good job. A real job. With benefits and flexibility and enough salary to catch up on rent and build a small emergency fund and maybe, just maybe, give her boys the kind of Christmas they deserved instead of the makeshift one she'd been planning with dollar store toys and homemade cookies. When her phone rang and she saw Julian Cross's name on the screen, she answered immediately. Mr. Cross, Ms. Harper, I'm calling about the inspection report. His voice was serious, professional, and Simone's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The other shoe dropping. The part where he tells me the building is uninhabitable and we have to leave. Okay, she said carefully. The inspector found some issues that need to be addressed immediately. The furnace is leaking carbon monoxide. What? Simone's hand flew to her mouth. It's at levels that aren't immediately dangerous, but with prolonged exposure, especially for children, it could cause serious health problems. I'm having it replaced tomorrow. In the meantime, I need you and the boys to stay somewhere else tonight. I don't have somewhere else, Simone said, her mind racing. I can't afford a hotel, and I don't have family. I've already booked you a suite at the Hampton Inn on Roosevelt Road, Julian interrupted gently. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen. It's paid for through the weekend, and I'll have the furnace replaced by Friday. You can move back in Saturday morning. Simone couldn't speak for a moment. You're putting us in a hotel? Just until the repairs are done. I can't have you staying in a building with a carbon monoxide leak. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if something happened. Mr. Cross, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just pack a bag for you and the boys. I'll pick you up at 6 p.m. You're picking us up? Unless you prefer I send a car service. No, Simone laughed shakily. I'm not used to this. any of this. I know, Julian said, and his voice was softer now. But you're going to have to get used to people helping you, Simone, starting with me. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his voice did something strange to her chest. After they hung up, Simone sat staring at her laptop screen, at the job offer that meant everything, and then at her phone, where Julian Cross's number was still displayed. In the span of 1 hour, her entire life had shifted from survival mode to something that felt almost like hope. Julian arrived at 6 p.m. exactly, and the boys were so excited about the hotel adventure that they were practically vibrating. They'd packed their own small backpacks. Elijah had his library books, Caleb had stuffed animals, and Isaiah had somehow fit 6 toy trucks and nothing else into his bag. Isaiah, you need pajamas, Simone said, unpacking the bag for the 3rd time. But my trucks can stay in the truck bin. You'll have them when we get back. Julian watched from the doorway, trying not to smile. Simone looked harried but beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or styling and everything to do with the fierce competence of a mother herding 3 energetic boys. Ready? He asked. As ready as we're going to be, Simone said. She did a final check of the apartment. Windows locked, lights off, space heater unplugged. The habits of someone who'd learned to be careful with money and safety. The boys tumbled into Julian's Range Rover with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for amusement parks. They'd never been in a car this nice, and everything was fascinating. The leather seats, the automatic windows, the screen in the dashboard that showed the backup camera. This is like a spaceship, Caleb whispered. It's just a car, Julian said, but he was smiling. The drive to the hotel took 20 minutes, and Simone spent most of it staring out the window, unusually quiet. Julian glanced at her several times, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept twisting her hands in her lap. You okay? He asked quietly. I got a job offer today, she said suddenly. Julian's face broke into a genuine smile. Simone, that's incredible. Tell me about it. Medical billing specialist, fully remote, $52,000 a year plus benefits. I start December 1st. Her voice was steady, but Julian could hear the emotion underneath. I can catch up on the rent, all of it, plus December and January. I can finally breathe. I'm so proud of you, Julian said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Simone looked at him, her eyes bright. I need to thank you. If you hadn't given me those 60 days, if you'd gone through with the eviction, I wouldn't have been able to take this job. I would have been in a shelter, trying to find any work I could get, probably something minimum wage that wouldn't have covered childcare. You gave me time to find the right opportunity, not just any opportunity. You did the work, Julian said. You got the job on your own merit. I just didn't stand in your way. You did more than that, Simone said softly. You believed we were worth the investment. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something that made Julian's chest feel tight and warm at the same time. Mr. Cross, are we almost there? Isaiah called from the back seat. Almost, buddy. 2 more minutes. The Hampton Inn suite was more space than Simone and the boys had in their entire apartment. 2 bedrooms, a living area with a pull-out couch, a full kitchen, and a bathroom with a tub big enough for all 3 boys to bathe at once if Simone wanted. The triplets immediately began exploring, opening every drawer and cabinet, testing the beds by jumping on them until Simone told them to stop. This is where we're sleeping? Elijah asked, awe in his voice. Just for a few days, Simone confirmed, until our apartment is fixed. Can we come back here after? Caleb asked. This is a special occasion, baby, but our apartment will be even better when we go home. Mr. Cross is fixing everything. Julian stood in the doorway, watching the boys explore with the kind of wonder that came from experiencing something new. He thought about his penthouse apartment, 3,000 square feet of luxury that he barely noticed anymore. When was the last time he'd felt wonder about anything? I should let you settle in, he said, but I'll check on the furnace installation tomorrow and keep you updated. Stay, Isaiah said suddenly, appearing at Julian's side. We're going to watch a movie. You can watch with us. Isaiah, Mr. Cross is busy, Simone started. Actually, Julian heard himself say, I don't have any plans tonight, if you don't mind the company. Simone looked at him for a long moment, and Julian couldn't quite read her expression. Then she smiled. We'd love the company. They ordered pizza. The boys voted unanimously for pepperoni, and watched an animated movie about talking cars that the triplets had apparently seen 100 times but still found hilarious. Julian sat on the couch with Isaiah curled up on one side of him and Caleb on the other, while Elijah claimed the armchair and Simone sat on the floor with her back against the couch. Halfway through the movie, Julian felt small fingers wrap around his hand. He looked down to find Isaiah had fallen asleep holding on to him, his breathing deep and even, his face peaceful. Simone glanced back and saw it. Something soft crossed her expression. "He doesn't usually warm up to people that fast," she whispered. "None of them do. But they trust you." "I'm honored," Julian whispered back, and he meant it. By the end of the movie, all three boys were asleep. Elijah had slumped over in the chair, Caleb was sprawled across the other end of the couch, and Isaiah was still tucked against Julian's side. "I should help you get them to bed," Julian said quietly. Together, they carried the boys to the bedroom. Simone changed them into pajamas while they were half asleep, and Julian pulled back the covers. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind of teamwork that came naturally when caring for children. When all three boys were tucked in, Simone stood in the doorway looking at them with an expression Julian recognized. Love mixed with exhaustion, mixed with the fierce determination of a parent who would do anything to protect these small lives. "Coffee?" she asked, gesturing to the kitchen. "Sure." They sat at the small table by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, lit up against the night sky. The coffee was hotel room quality, not great but warm and caffeinated. "Can I ask you something?" Simone said after a moment. "Of course. Why are you really doing all this? And don't give me the line about having resources. There's something more." Julian wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, considering how much to share. Then he found himself telling her everything: his childhood, his mother's struggle, the eviction that had changed the trajectory of his life, the years in the foster system, the wall he'd built around himself that had made him successful but lonely. Simone listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face. "I built my entire career on making sure I'd never be that powerless again," Julian finished. "But somewhere along the way, I became the person holding the power, making other people feel the way I used to feel. And I don't want to be that person anymore." "So we're what, your redemption?" Simone asked, not unkindly. "No," Julian said firmly. "You're not my redemption project. You're a woman who deserves help and didn't get it from the system that's supposed to support people in your situation. I'm just doing what should have been done a long time ago. By multiple government agencies and social services programs, probably," Simone said, with a slight smile. "Not by one millionaire landlord who's decided to play fairy godfather. Is that what I'm doing? I don't know," Simone said honestly. "But I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare me a little. I've learned not to depend on people, Julian. Everyone who was supposed to help me eventually left. My mom died, my husband abandoned us. The hospital laid me off. Every safety net I thought I had disappeared. So I built a life where I didn't need anyone. And now here I am, trying to help. And that threatens the independence you've worked so hard to maintain," Julian said, understanding. "Exactly. For what it's worth," Julian said, "I'm not trying to make you dependent on me. I'm trying to help you get to a place where you don't need my help anymore, where you have stability and options and security." "And then what?" Simone asked. "You walk away? Move on to the next tenant who needs saving?" "I don't know," Julian admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Right now, I'm just trying to make sure your boys don't get carbon monoxide poisoning and that you can keep your apartment long enough to start your new job." Simone studied him for a long moment. "You're different than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone colder, more detached. Someone who saw us as a problem to be solved, not as people. But you're not like that. You sat through an entire kids' movie with Isaiah drooling on your shoulder. You helped put my children to bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. You're not just helping us, Julian. You actually care. And that's what scares me the most." "Why does that scare you?" "Because what happens when you stop caring?" Simone's voice was barely above a whisper. "What happens when this feeling wears off and you remember you have a business to run and a life to get back to? My boys have already lost their father. I can't watch them get attached to someone else who might leave." The vulnerability in her words hit Julian like a physical blow. She wasn't just protecting her own heart. She was protecting her children's hearts. "I don't have all the answers," Julian said carefully. "I can't predict the future or promise you things I'm not sure about yet. But I can tell you this, I don't make commitments lightly, and I don't walk away from people I care about. Your boys, you're not an obligation to me. You're people I genuinely want in my life. For how long? As long as you'll let me be there," Julian said. Simone's eyes glistened. "That's a big promise." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Then Simone reached across the table and placed her hand over Julian's. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the hotel, for the furnace, for the 60 days, for all of it. But mostly for seeing us, for treating us like we matter." "You do matter," Julian said, turning his hand over so their fingers intertwined. "More than you know." It was nearly midnight when Julian finally left. As he drove back to his empty penthouse, he thought about Isaiah falling asleep holding his hand, about the way Simone had looked at him over coffee, vulnerable and brave at the same time, about 3 little boys who'd shared their crackers and their movie and their trust like they were gifts. And he realized with sudden, startling clarity that somewhere in the past week, this had stopped being about easing his conscience or making up for his past. This had become about building a future. The furnace was replaced by Friday afternoon, along with upgrades to the electrical system and emergency repairs to the plumbing. Julian had also, without telling Simone, arranged for a contractor to patch the worst of the water damage and install new windows in the ground floor apartment. When Simone returned on Saturday morning and saw what he'd done, she stood in her living room and cried. "Julian, this is too much," she said, running her hand along the new window frame. "The heat, I understand. The safety issues, absolutely. But new windows, fresh paint on the ceiling, you didn't have to do all this. I wanted you and the boys to have a home that felt safe and warm," Julian said simply. "Consider it an early Christmas present." The triplets, meanwhile, were racing through the apartment discovering all the changes. The heat actually worked now, maintaining a comfortable temperature instead of the uneven cold spots they had grown used to. The windows sealed properly, keeping out the drafts. Even the water pressure in the shower had improved. "Mr. Julian fixed everything," Caleb announced, appearing in the living room with his brothers in tow. Mr. Julian. It had started at the hotel when Isaiah couldn't quite manage Mr. Cross and had shortened it to Mr. Julian. Now all 3 boys used it, and every time Julian heard it, something warm bloomed in his chest. "Did you see our room?" Elijah asked. "The window isn't cold anymore." "I saw," Julian said. "Do you like it?" All 3 boys nodded enthusiastically. Then Isaiah asked the question that had apparently been building. "Are you going to stay for lunch?" Julian glanced at Simone, who was wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. She gave him a small nod. "I'd love to stay for lunch." It became a pattern over the next 2 weeks. Julian would stop by in the evenings after work, ostensibly to check on the repairs or drop off paperwork, but really because he'd started to crave the chaos of that small apartment. The boys would immediately involve him in whatever game they were playing. Simone would insist he stay for dinner, and Julian would find himself sitting at that crowded kitchen table, feeling more at home than he ever did in his penthouse. He helped with bedtime routines, reading stories with different voices for different characters, while 3 little boys giggled and demanded, "One more chapter." He taught Elijah how to tie his shoes. He played trucks with Isaiah, building elaborate road systems across the living room floor. He colored with Caleb, who had decided that Julian needed to improve his artistic skills and took the responsibility seriously. And he talked with Simone, long conversations after the boys were asleep, sitting on the couch with coffee or tea, sharing stories about their lives, their fears, their dreams. Julian learned that she'd wanted to be a nurse before financial realities made her choose the faster path of medical billing, that she loved to read but rarely had time anymore, that she sang in the church choir before the triplets were born, that she missed her mother with an ache that never quite went away. Simone learned that Julian had put himself through college while working 3 jobs, that he'd been engaged once, briefly, to a woman, who'd ultimately chosen someone with a more conventional career, that he loved architecture and sometimes drove around the city just looking at buildings, that he'd never learned to cook properly and lived mostly on takeout and protein bars. "That's tragic," Simone declared one evening. "No one should live on protein bars." "They're efficient," Julian defended. "They're sad," Simone corrected. "Come over next Sunday. I'll teach you how to make a proper meal. Are you offering me cooking lessons? I'm offering to save you from malnutrition, she said, but she was smiling. It was easy, Julian realized. Being with Simone and the boys felt effortless in a way nothing in his life ever had. There was no performance, no need to be the ruthless businessman or the successful developer. He could just be Julian, the guy who was bad at coloring but getting better, who read bedtime stories with silly voices, who'd learned that triplets required strategic negotiation skills that would put most business deals to shame. But the ease of it scared him. Because the more time he spent at 1847 Ashland Avenue, the harder it became to imagine his life without this family in it. Simone started her new job on December 1st, and the relief of a steady paycheck was visible in the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she smiled more easily. She worked from the kitchen table, her laptop set up in the corner, taking billing calls while the boys played nearby. The first Friday after her first paycheck, she asked Julian to meet her at her apartment after work. He arrived to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a bank envelope and a determined expression. "This is the first month's rent," she said, pushing the envelope toward him. $1,200. Julian looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Simone, I know I still owe you for the past 6 months," she continued, "and I have a payment plan worked out, $500 extra per month until we're caught up. It'll take me a year, but I can do it. I need to do it." "You don't owe me anything," Julian said quietly. "I owe you $7,100 plus whatever you spent on repairs, which I'm guessing was significant." Simone's voice was firm. "Julian, I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm not a charity case. I need to pay my debts." "What if I told you the building owner has decided to forgive the back rent?" Simone's eyes narrowed. "You are the building owner." "Technically, my company is." "Julian." He held up his hands. "Okay, yes. But the point stands. You don't owe me that money. You were in an impossible situation through no fault of your own. The system failed you. I'm not going to compound that by holding you to a debt that accumulated because you couldn't find work. That's not how rental agreements work." "That's exactly how they work when the landlord says so," Julian countered. "Simone, you're back on your feet now. You have a job, you're paying current rent, you're taking care of your boys. That's what matters. The rest is just numbers. Numbers that represent my integrity," Simone said. "I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Julian moved to sit across from her at the table. "I have never, not for 1 second, thought you were taking advantage of anything. You asked for 60 days. I gave you 60 days. Everything else I did because I wanted to, because your family deserved better than what you were getting, not because I expected anything in return." "That's the problem," Simone said softly. "You keep giving, and I don't know how to balance that scale. I don't know what you want from this." "What I want?" Julian considered the question carefully. "I want to keep having dinner with you and the boys. I want to keep reading bedtime stories with ridiculous voices that make Isaiah laugh so hard he gets hiccups. I want to keep sitting here at this table talking to you about everything and nothing. I want to be part of your life, Simone. Not as your landlord or your benefactor, but as someone who cares about you." Simone's breath caught. "Julian, I know this is complicated," he continued. "I know I've inserted myself into your life in ways that blur every professional boundary. And if you want me to back off, if you need space, I'll respect that. But I need you to know that this isn't about the money or the property or evening some cosmic debt from my past. This is about you, about your boys, about a family that makes me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in 15 years. The silence that followed felt weighted with everything unsaid between them. Then Simone reached across the table and took his hand. "I don't want you to back off," she said quietly. "I want you to stay, but I also need to maintain some sense of independence, some pride in the fact that I can take care of my family. So please let me pay the current rent, let me contribute something." Julian looked at their intertwined hands, at the determination in her face, and understood. This wasn't about the money. It was about Simone reclaiming agency in her own life. "Okay," he said. "Current rent, paid monthly, but the back rent stays forgiven. Deal?" "Deal," Simone said, relief evident in her voice. "Good. Now, can we talk about something more important?" "What's that?" Isaiah told me you make something called the best mac and cheese in the whole world, and I've yet to be invited to witness this culinary miracle. I'm feeling discriminated against. Simone laughed, the tension breaking. Next Sunday, cooking lessons and the famous mac and cheese, but you have to actually participate, no watching from the sidelines. I'll bring an apron, Julian promised. The complication started the following Tuesday. Julian was in a board meeting when his phone buzzed with a text from Simone. He normally wouldn't check during meetings, but something made him glance down. "Can you call me when you get a chance?" "Nothing urgent, just need advice." He excused himself and stepped out into the hallway. "Everything okay?" he asked when she answered. "Yes and no." Simone's voice was strained. "The boy's father showed up at the apartment this morning." Julian's entire body went rigid. "What?" "He knocked on the door while I was working, said he'd heard I got a new job and wanted to discuss our arrangement. Except, we don't have an arrangement. He abandoned us when I was pregnant and hasn't paid a dime of child support in 4 years. What did he want? Money, what else? He said now that I'm doing better, I should be willing to help him out. He's behind on some debts and thought I might be generous enough to assist the father of my children." The barely contained anger in her voice was matched by the fury building in Julian's chest. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to leave and not come back. But, Julian, he knows where we live, and he seemed off. Desperate, maybe. I don't think he's going to let this go easily." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but the way he looked at the apartment, at the new windows, at my laptop, he was calculating, figuring out what he could take or leverage. I know that look. It's how he always was when we were together." Julian was already heading back to his office to grab his keys. "I'm coming over." "You don't have to." "Simone, I'm coming over. We're going to figure this out." He heard her exhale shakily. "Okay, thank you." Marcus intercepted him in the hallway. "Where are you going?" "We're in the middle of a board meeting. Emergency. I'll fill you in later." "Julian, the investors are here. We're discussing the Q4 projections." "You handle it," Julian said, not slowing down. "I trust you." Marcus watched him go with an expression that was half concern, half resignation. "This is about her, isn't it?" Julian didn't answer, but they both knew the truth. Simone buzzed him up 20 minutes later. The boys were in their room playing, unaware of the morning's visitor. Simone looked rattled in a way Julian hadn't seen before, even during the worst of the rent crisis. "Tell me everything," Julian said, once they were seated at the kitchen table. Simone recounted the conversation in detail. Her ex-husband, Marcus Terrell, had shown up around 10 a.m. He'd been charming at first, asking about the boys, commenting on how nice the place looked. Then he'd mentioned hearing through mutual friends that she had a new job, congratulated her, and slowly worked his way to asking for $5,000 to handle some business issues. When Simone refused, his demeanor had changed. He'd made comments about how she seemed to be doing quite well for someone who claimed to be broke. He'd noticed the new windows, the improvements to the apartment. He'd asked pointedly where the money was coming from, if she'd only just started working. He was implying something, Simone said, her jaw tight, suggesting that I had to be getting money from somewhere, from someone. He made it sound dirty. Julian finished, understanding. "Like you were being kept." "Yes." Simone's voice was barely above a whisper. "He doesn't know about you. Doesn't know anything about the situation with the building or the eviction or any of it. But he's going to find out. People talk in this neighborhood. And when he does, when he realizes there's a wealthy man in my life." She trailed off, but Julian understood the implication. Marcus Terrell would see Julian as a target, as someone with money who demonstrated a willingness to spend it on Simone and her boys. And desperate men did desperate things. "We need to document everything," Julian said. "Every interaction, every request, every veiled threat. If he comes back, you call the police immediately, and you call me." "Julian, I don't want to drag you into my mess." "You're not dragging me anywhere," Julian interrupted firmly. "I'm choosing to be here. And Simone, you need to understand something. Those boys in that room, you're not just tenants to me anymore. You haven't been for weeks. Anyone who threatens you threatens people I care about. Deeply." Simone's eyes filled with tears. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You getting pulled into drama and complications because you tried to help me." "Life is complicated," Julian said, reaching across the table to take her hands. People are complicated, but that doesn't mean we stop showing up for each other. Your ex is your problem only if you face him alone. Together, we can handle this. Together, Simone repeated, like she was testing the word. Together, Julian confirmed. If you want that. Simone looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd shown up without question when she needed help, who'd proven over and over that his promises meant something. Then she looked up and met his eyes. I want that, she said. I'm terrified of it, but I want it. Good, Julian said. Because you're stuck with me now? A small laugh escaped her. Is that a threat or a promise? Both, Julian said, and he smiled. That evening, after talking through safety protocols and making sure Simone had both Julian's number and a police non-emergency contact saved in her phone, Julian stayed for dinner. The boys sensed something was off. Children always did, and were quieter than usual, staying close to their mother. Is everything okay, Mama? Elijah asked during dinner. Everything's fine, baby, Simone assured him. Just some grown-up stuff to handle. Mr. Julian will help, Caleb said with absolute confidence. He fixes things. Julian felt that familiar warmth in his chest, mixed now with a fierce protectiveness. These children trusted him. Their mother was beginning to trust him, and someone had walked into their safe space and made them feel threatened. After the boys were in bed, Simone and Julian sat on the couch, closer than they usually did. She leaned against him, exhausted, and Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. For not making me feel like I was overreacting. You weren't overreacting. Your instincts are telling you something's wrong, and I trust those instincts. My instincts about Marcus were wrong 4 years ago, Simone said bitterly. I married him thinking he was solid, dependable. Then I got pregnant and he disappeared before the boys were even born. So, excuse me if I don't have a lot of faith in my ability to judge character. Your instincts about him are right now, Julian said. That's what matters. And Simone, for what it's worth, your instincts about me, whatever they're telling you, I hope they're saying I'm someone worth trusting. Because I am. I'm not going anywhere. Simone tilted her head up to look at him. They were close, closer than they'd ever been. Julian could count the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could feel her breath soft against his cheek. I'm starting to believe that, she whispered. Julian didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of them, drawn together by weeks of growing connection, by shared dinners and bedtime stories and late-night conversations, by the recognition that what had started as landlord and tenant had transformed into something infinitely more complicated and precious. Their lips met softly, tentatively, like a question being asked and answered. Simone's hand came up to rest against Julian's chest, and he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Simone rested her forehead against his. This is really complicated, she whispered. I know, Julian said. You're technically still my landlord. I know. People are going to have opinions. I don't care, Julian said firmly. Do you? Simone pulled back to look at him fully. I care about my boys. I care about their stability and their happiness, and I care about not getting hurt again. I can't promise you won't ever get hurt, Julian said honestly. I can't predict every outcome or protect you from everything life throws at us. But I can promise you that I'm all in. Whatever this is between us, I want to see where it goes, and I'll fight for it, for you, for those 3 amazing kids in there, as long as you'll let me. What if it doesn't work out? Simone asked, voicing the fear she'd been carrying. What if we try this and it falls apart and I lose the apartment and... Stop, Julian said gently, cupping her face in his hands. The apartment is yours regardless. I'll put it in writing if you need me to. A lease with terms that protect you no matter what happens between us personally. This relationship and your housing situation are completely separate things. Can they be? Can we really separate them? We can, Julian said. We will, because I'm not the kind of man who would use housing as leverage in a relationship, and you're not the kind of woman who would stay with someone out of fear of losing her home. We're better than that. Simone searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda, but all she saw was sincerity, and something that looked a lot like love. Okay, she said finally. Okay, we try this, but slowly. I need to protect my heart and my boys' hearts, so we take this one day at a time. One day at a time, Julian agreed. Starting with tomorrow. What time should I come over? Simone laughed. You're already planning to come back tomorrow? I have a standing invitation for dinner, don't I? The boys said so. The boys adopted you weeks ago, Simone said, smiling. I'm just finally catching up. Julian kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. When he finally left that night, it was late, and he drove home with his mind replaying every moment. The taste of her lips, the feel of her hand against his chest, the way she'd said, okay, like she was making a leap of faith. His phone buzzed with a text as he pulled into his building's garage. Thank you for today. For everything. Sleep well. Julian responded immediately. Thank you for trusting me. Sweet dreams. J. He sat in his car for a moment, staring at the message thread, at this woman who'd somehow become the center of his world in a matter of weeks. Marcus Webb had been right. This wasn't about the property anymore. This was about something infinitely more valuable, infinitely more complicated. This was about building a life, not just an empire. And for the first time in 15 years, Julian Cross felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Marcus Terrell showed up again 3 days later, but this time Julian was there. It was Sunday afternoon, the day Simone had promised to teach Julian how to cook. The boys were in the living room building an elaborate block tower, while Simone and Julian worked in the kitchen, her hands guiding his as he learned to properly chop vegetables for what she called real food, not bachelor food. You're holding the knife wrong, Simone said, adjusting his grip. Her body was close to his, her breath warm against his neck, and Julian found it very difficult to concentrate on the onions. This is distracting, he murmured. The onions? You, he said, turning his head to kiss her cheek. Definitely you. Simone smiled, that soft, genuine smile that made his chest feel tight. Focus, Mr. Cross. You need to learn to feed yourself properly. I'm doing fine, Julian protested. You had protein bars for breakfast this morning. That's not fine. That's a cry for help. The knock on the door interrupted their banter. All 4 of them froze. Simone and Julian in the kitchen, the boys in the living room. Because there was something aggressive about the knock, something demanding. Simone's face went pale. That's him. Julian set down the knife immediately. Stay here. Julian, stay here with the boys, he said firmly. I'll handle this. He moved to the door and opened it to find a man in his mid-30s with the same warm brown skin as the triplets but harder eyes. Marcus. Terrell was lean, with the kind of restless energy that came from desperation or addiction or both. He wore a leather jacket that had seen better days and had the look of someone who'd once been handsome but had let life roughen the edges. His expression shifted from aggressive confidence to confusion when he saw Julian instead of Simone. Who the hell are you? Marcus demanded. I'm the landlord, Julian said calmly. And you are? I'm here to see Simone. That's none of your business. Actually, it is my business when someone shows up at my property making unwelcome visits to my tenants. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Your tenant, huh? That's what we're calling it? That's exactly what we're calling it, Julian said, his voice cooling several degrees. Ms. Harper asked you not to return. You're now trespassing. I suggest you leave before I call the police. I have a right to see my sons, Marcus said, raising his voice so it would carry into the apartment. Simone, you can't keep my kids from me. From inside, Julian heard Elijah's small voice. That's our dad? The confusion and uncertainty in that question made Julian's jaw clench. These boys didn't know their father. Marcus Terrell was a stranger to them. Simone appeared behind Julian, her hand on his arm. Marcus, leave. You gave up your rights when you walked away 4 years ago. I made a mistake, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something that might have been intended as apologetic, but came off as manipulative. I was young, scared, but I've changed, Simone. I want to be part of their lives now. Now? Simone's voice shook with anger. Now that I have a job, now that I'm not struggling, where were you when I was 6 months pregnant and terrified? Where were you when they were born 8 weeks premature and I spent every night in the NICU praying they'd survive? Where were you for their first steps, their first words, their first day of preschool? I was dealing with my own stuff. You were dealing with running away from responsibility, Simone cut him off. You don't get to show up now and play concerned father. You don't get to use my children as leverage to get money from me. Marcus's expression hardened. Is that what he told you I wanted? Your rich boyfriend here? He didn't have to tell me anything, Simone said. You showed your hand last time. This has nothing to do with the boys and everything to do with you being broke and desperate. You think you're better than me now? Living in this fixed-up place? Got some white boy playing daddy to my kids? I'm going to stop you right there, Julian interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. You need to leave, now. Marcus took a step forward, and Julian matched it, putting himself between Marcus and Simone. He was taller than Marcus by several inches and had a good 30 pounds on him. The message was clear. This ends badly for you, if you push it. You threatening me? Marcus asked, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. I'm protecting my tenant from harassment, Julian said. There's a difference. But if you come back here again, if you contact Ms. Harper or attempt to approach those children without going through proper legal channels, I will have you arrested for trespassing and file for a restraining order on her behalf. Are we clear? Marcus looked between Julian and Simone, calculating. Then his expression turned ugly. This ain't over, he said. Those are my kids and I got rights. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I look forward to it, Julian said coldly. Now get out. Marcus left, but not before shooting one more venomous look at Simone. Julian watched until he disappeared around the corner, then closed and locked the door. When he turned around, he found all three boys standing in the hallway, wide-eyed and scared. Simone was crouched down to their level, trying to comfort them, but they looked shaken. Was that really our dad? Isaiah asked, his voice small. Yes, baby, Simone said gently. Why was he yelling? Caleb asked. Sometimes adults argue, Simone said. But it's okay now. He's gone. Elijah looked past his mother to Julian. Are you going to make sure he doesn't come back? The trust in that question, the way this 4-year-old was looking to Julian for protection, made something fierce and primal surge in his chest. Yes, Julian said firmly. I promise. Good, Elijah said, then took his brother's hands. Come on, let's finish our tower. The boys retreated to the living room, and Simone stood up slowly. She was shaking. Julian pulled her into his arms immediately. It's okay. He's gone. He's going to come back, Simone said against his chest. Maybe not here, but he'll find some other way to cause trouble. That's what he does. Then we'll handle it, Julian said. Together, remember? Simone pulled back to look at him. Julian, this is going to get messy. If he actually gets a lawyer, if he tries to file for custody or visitation, it's going to be a fight. And having you in my life, in the boys' lives, is going to complicate things. He'll use it against me. Say I'm exposing them to strangers, or that I'm prioritizing a relationship over them, or... Stop, Julian said gently. We'll cross those bridges when we come to them. But, Simone, I need you to hear me. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever legal battle comes, we'll face it. I have resources, I have lawyers. And I have something Marcus doesn't have. What's that? I actually care about those boys, Julian said. I'm not trying to use them as leverage or as a way to get money. I care about their well-being, their happiness, their future, and any judge worth their salt is going to see through his act. Simone leaned her forehead against his chest, exhausted. How did my life get so complicated? Life's always complicated, Julian said, stroking her back. But at least now, you don't have to handle it alone. From the living room, Isaiah called out, Mr. Julian, our tower fell. We need engineering help. Despite everything, Simone laughed. You've been conscripted. I wouldn't have it any other way, Julian said, kissing her forehead before heading to the living room to help rebuild the tower. The next morning, Julian had an emergency meeting with his attorney, Patricia Chen, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in real estate law but had connections in family court. Walk me through the situation, Patricia said, her pen poised over her legal pad. Julian explained everything. The original eviction, the 60-day extension, the relationship that had developed. Marcus Terrell's sudden appearance and transparent attempt at manipulation. Patricia listened without interrupting, making notes. When he finished, she sat back and studied him. You're in a relationship with a former tenant, she said. Current tenant, Julian corrected. She's paying rent. Everything's above board. Ethically gray, but legally fine, Patricia conceded. But Julian, you need to understand what you're walking into. If Marcus Terrell files for custody or visitation, Simone's going to need a family law attorney, not a real estate lawyer. And if he's smart, or if he gets a smart lawyer, They're going to paint your involvement in the worst possible light. Let them try, Julian said. I have documentation of everything. The repairs were building maintenance, not personal gifts. The rent extension was a business decision. My relationship with Simone started after all of that was resolved. Did it, though? Patricia asked pointedly. Because from what you've told me, you were having dinner with this family, spending time with the children, getting emotionally involved while she was still a delinquent tenant. Julian was quiet. She was right. I'm not judging you, Patricia said, her voice softening. I'm telling you how opposing counsel will frame it. They'll say you used your position of power to coerce a vulnerable single mother into a relationship. They'll say she felt obligated to accept your advances because you held her housing over her head. They'll make you look like a predator and her look like a victim, and they'll use that to argue that you're not a safe influence on the children. That's not what happened, Julian said firmly. I know, but optics matter in custody cases. So here's what we're going to do. Patricia pulled out a fresh legal pad. First, we're going to document everything, every repair, every expense, every business decision, with a clear paper trail showing business justification. Second, we're getting Simone to sign a new lease that removes any possibility of claiming impropriety in your landlord-tenant relationship. Third, I'm referring her to the best family law attorney in Chicago, and you're going to pay the retainer as a loan that she can pay back if she insists, but that ensures she has top-tier representation. Done, Julian said without hesitation. Fourth, Patricia continued, you need to be prepared for your personal life to become very public. If this goes to court, every detail of your relationship with Simone and those boys is going to be examined. Are you ready for that? Julian thought about Elijah asking if he'd make sure their father didn't come back, about Isaiah falling asleep holding his hand, about Caleb sharing his favorite toy truck, about Simone's trust, hard-won and precious. Yes, he said. Whatever it takes. Patricia smiled slightly. That's what I thought. Okay, let's build your case. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus Terrell did exactly what Simone predicted. He hired a lawyer and filed for joint custody and back child support, calculating that even if he lost the custody fight, he could leverage the threat of it to extract money from Simone. But what Marcus didn't account for was that Simone now had resources. Patricia's referral, attorney Rebecca Morrison, was a powerhouse in family law with a reputation for dismantling manipulative custody claims. And every attempt Marcus made to paint Simone as an unfit mother or Julian as a predatory influence ran into a wall of documentation, character witnesses, and legal expertise. More importantly, the boys themselves had no relationship with Marcus. When the court-appointed child psychologist interviewed them separately, all three gave the same consistent message. They didn't know the man claiming to be their father, they didn't want to spend time with him, and they felt safe with their mother and with Mr. Julian. The breaking point came during a mediation session in mid-December. Marcus and his attorney sat across the table from Simone, Rebecca, and Julian. The court mediator reviewed the case file, then looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Terrell, you abandoned Ms. Harper during her pregnancy and provided no financial or emotional support for 4 years. You have no established relationship with your children. Your recent employment history is sporadic at best, and you have outstanding debts with multiple creditors. What exactly are you hoping to achieve here? Marcus's lawyer jumped in. My client is seeking to establish a relationship with his sons. He's made mistakes, but he deserves the opportunity to be a father. Does he? Rebecca asked coolly. Because from where I sit, Mr. Terrell only showed interest in these children after learning their mother gained stable employment. His own text messages to Ms. Harper, which we've submitted as evidence, explicitly ask for money. This isn't about fatherhood. This is about extortion. That's a serious accusation, Marcus's lawyer protested. It's a documented pattern, Rebecca countered, sliding a folder across the table. Text messages, witness statements from neighbors who heard Mr. Terrell's aggressive demands, testimony from the boys themselves who don't recognize this man as their father in any meaningful sense. The mediator reviewed the documents, his expression growing more skeptical. Mr. Terrell, I'm going to be frank with you. You have a very weak case for custody. If this proceeds to trial, you're likely to lose and potentially face charges for attempted extortion or harassment. My recommendation is that you withdraw your petition. I have rights, Marcus said stubbornly. You have the right to file, the mediator agreed, but you also have the responsibility to act in the children's best interest. Nothing in your behavior suggests that's your motivation. Marcus and his lawyer conferred in whispers. Julian watched, his hand resting on Simone's knee under the table, feeling her tension. Finally, Marcus's lawyer spoke. My client is willing to withdraw his petition in exchange for a signed agreement that he won't be pursued for back child support. Absolutely not, Rebecca said immediately. Ms. Harper is entitled to that support. We can negotiate, the lawyer started. No, Simone said suddenly, her voice clear and strong. Everyone turned to look at her. I don't want his money. I don't want anything from him. I just want him out of our lives, permanently. Simone, Rebecca said carefully, you're entitled to— I know what I'm entitled to, Simone interrupted. But putting a dollar amount on what he owes won't change the past 4 years. It won't give my boys the father they deserved. It'll just keep him connected to us through legal obligations and resentment. I want a clean break, complete termination of parental rights in exchange for no child support claims. Ever. Marcus looked almost relieved, which told Julian everything he needed to know about the man's true priorities. The mediator looked at Rebecca, who nodded reluctantly. If that's what Ms. Harper wants, we can draft that agreement. One more condition, Julian said, speaking for the first time. Everyone looked at him. Mr. Terrell signs a no-contact agreement. No approaching Ms. Harper or the children. No phone calls, no messages, no showing up at their home. Any violation results in immediate legal action. That's excessive, Marcus's lawyer protested. It's non-negotiable, Julian said flatly. You want a clean break? That's what a clean break looks like. Marcus stared at Julian with barely concealed hatred. You think you're their father now? You think you can just step in and replace me? I'm not trying to replace anyone, Julian said calmly. I'm just showing up, which is apparently more than you ever did. The mediator intervened before Marcus could respond. We'll draft the agreement incorporating these terms. If both parties sign, this matter is resolved. Otherwise, we proceed to trial. And, Mr. Terrell, I strongly advise you that won't end well for you. 3 days later, Marcus signed the agreement. Simone's hands shook as she added her signature. But when Rebecca confirmed it was done, that Marcus had legally and permanently severed his parental rights, she broke down crying with relief. Julian held her in the parking lot of the courthouse while she sobbed 4 years of fear and stress and uncertainty into his shoulder. It's over, he murmured against her hair. He's gone. You're free. We're free, Simone corrected, pulling back to look at him with red-rimmed eyes. Julian, without you, without the lawyers, the documentation, the support, I would have lost. Or I would have had to let him into our lives, and I don't know which would have been worse. You would have found a way, Julian said. You always do. I just help speed things along. Simone reached up and cupped his face in her hands. You did more than help. You stood beside me when you didn't have to. You fought for my boys like they were yours. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't have to thank me, Julian said. You just have to let me keep being part of your life. For how long? Simone asked, echoing her question from weeks ago. How does forever sound? Julian asked softly. Simone's breath caught. Julian, I know it's fast, he said. I know we've only known each other for 2 months, but Simone, in that time, you and your boys have become the center of my world. When I think about my future now, I can't imagine it without you 3 constantly talking over each other at dinner, without Isaiah falling asleep on my shoulder, without Caleb sharing his toys, without Elijah looking at me like I'm someone worth trusting, without you making me laugh and challenging me and reminding me what actually matters in life. We come as a package deal, Simone said, tears streaming down her face again. You can't have me without 3 very loud, very energetic 4-year-olds. I wouldn't want you any other way, Julian said. Simone Harper, I'm not asking you to marry me right now in a courthouse parking lot, but I am asking you to believe that I'm in this for the long haul. That when I say I want to build a future with you, I mean it, all of you. Simone kissed him then, soft and deep and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears. I believe you, she whispered, and yes, I want that future too. With you. Christmas came 2 weeks later, and Julian spent it at 1847 Ashland Avenue. The apartment was transformed. Simone had put up a small tree that the boys had decorated with enthusiastic disregard for any aesthetic principles. Lights were strung haphazardly across the living room, and construction paper snowflakes covered every available surface. Julian had tried not to go overboard with gifts, but he'd failed spectacularly. There were matching bicycles for all three boys, helmets included, educational toys that Simone had mentioned they needed, a new laptop for Simone since hers kept freezing, books, clothes, art supplies. "Julian, this is too much," Simone protested when she saw everything under the tree. "It's their first real Christmas where we're not stressed about money," she had told him earlier. "I want to make it special." "Then let me help make it special," he'd said. "Please." Now, watching the triplets tear into wrapping paper with gleeful abandon, seeing their faces light up with each new discovery, Julian felt something settle in his chest. This was what Christmas was supposed to feel like. Not expensive business dinners or expensive gifts exchanged out of obligation, but children's laughter and pure joy. "Mr. Julian, look!" Isaiah held up a toy fire truck that made realistic siren sounds. "It's amazing." "That's pretty cool," Julian agreed. "Can we go ride our bikes?" Caleb asked. "After breakfast," Simone said, "and after you clean up all this wrapping paper." The boys groaned but started gathering paper. And Julian helped while Simone started making pancakes in the kitchen. It was domestic and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Later, after the boys were outside testing their new bikes with Julian supervising while Simone watched from the porch, Elijah rode up to Julian and stopped. "Mr. Julian, can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy." "Are you going to stay?" Elijah asked, his serious eyes studying Julian's face. "Forever, I mean. Or are you going to leave like our dad did?" The question hit Julian like a physical blow. This child, 4 years old, was already bracing for abandonment. Julian crouched down so they were eye level. "Elijah, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it, okay?" Elijah nodded. "I'm not going anywhere," Julian said firmly. "I love your mom, and I love you and your brothers. You're part of my family now, and family doesn't leave. Not when things get hard, not when you're older, not ever. Do you understand?" "You love us?" Elijah asked, his voice small and hopeful. "I do," Julian said, and realized he'd never said those words before to anyone except his own mother years ago. "Very much." Elijah thought about this for a moment, then threw his arms around Julian's neck. "I love you too, Mr. Julian. We all do." Over Elijah's shoulder, Julian saw Simone standing on the porch with tears running down her face. She mouthed, "Thank you," and Julian nodded, his own throat tight. That night, after the boys were asleep and Julian was preparing to leave, Simone walked him to the door. "Thank you for today," she said, "for everything. This was the best Christmas we've ever had." "It was the best Christmas I've ever had," Julian said honestly. "And I meant what I told Elijah. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," Simone said. "I'm starting to really believe that." "Good," Julian said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Because I have one more gift for you." Simone's eyes widened. "Julian, it's not what you think," he said quickly. "Open it." Inside the box was a key. "That's to my apartment," Julian said. "I'm not asking you to move in. I know that's way too fast. But I'm asking you to have a place to go if you ever need it. A place where you and the boys are always welcome. Where you have space that's yours. I want you to know you have options, Simone. Always." Simone stared at the key, then up at him. "You're giving me a key to your home." "I'm giving you access to my life," Julian corrected. "All of it. No more boundaries. No more keeping parts of myself separate. If we're doing this, I want to do it right." Simone closed the box and set it carefully on the table. Then she pulled Julian down into a kiss that was different from all the others, deeper, more certain, full of trust. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I fought it. I was terrified of it, but I do. I love you, Julian Cross." "I love you too," Julian said, and felt something click into place, like the last piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his entire life. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Christmas tree in Julian's penthouse was significantly bigger than the one in the apartment had been, and it needed to be because there were significantly more people gathered around it. Julian and Simone had gotten married in June, a small ceremony in her grandmother's church, with 3 very excited ring-bearers who'd taken their jobs extremely seriously. The boys had moved into Julian's place in July, transforming one of the spare bedrooms into what they called the triplet room. Bunk beds and organized chaos and more toys than 3 children should reasonably have. Now, on Christmas morning, the space was filled with family. Marcus Webb and his wife Sarah, who'd become Aunt Sarah to the boys. Patricia Chen and her partner, who'd been drafted into the extended family through sheer proximity. Rebecca Morrison, who the boys adored because she'd defeated the bad guy in their origin story. And in the corner, watching her 3 sons show off their new toys to the assembled adults, was Simone, with Julian's arms wrapped around her from behind and his chin resting on her shoulder. "This is a far cry from last Christmas," Simone murmured. "Better or worse?" Julian asked. "Better," Simone said without hesitation. "So much better." "Mr. Julian," Isaiah called. "Come see what Santa brought." "Duty calls," Simone said, smiling. "Actually," Julian said, pulling a small box from his pocket, "I have one more present for you." Simone turned to face him. "Julian, you already got me." She stopped when she saw what was in the box, not jewelry, documents. "That's adoption paperwork," Julian said quietly, "for the boys. If you're okay with it, if they're okay with it, I'd like to officially adopt them. I know legally I'm already their stepfather, but I want it to be more than that. I want to be their dad, in every way that matters." Simone's hand flew to her mouth. "You want to adopt them?" "I want them to be mine," Julian said. "Legally, officially. I want them to have my name if they want it. I want to be the person they call when they need something. I want to be their dad." "They already think of you that way," Simone said, tears streaming. "They've been calling you dad when you're not around for months now." Julian's throat tightened. "They have?" "They have," Simone confirmed. "So yes, Julian, 1,000 times yes. Adopt our boys. Make it official." From across the room, Elijah had noticed them talking and walked over, his serious 5-year-old face studying them. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Why's Mama crying?" "Happy tears," Simone said, wiping her eyes. "Elijah," Julian said, crouching down, "how would you and your brothers feel about me being your dad, like officially, with papers and everything?" Elijah's eyes went wide. "You mean we'd be Julian Crosses, like you?" "If you want to be," Julian said. Elijah turned and shouted across the room. "Caleb! Isaiah! Mr. Julian wants to be our real dad!" 2 identical faces whipped around, and then both boys were running over, crashing into Julian with enough force to nearly knock him over. "Really?" Caleb asked. "For real, Isaiah added. "For real, Julian confirmed, his arms around all 3 boys. "Yes!" all 3 shouted in unison, and the entire room erupted in applause and laughter. Later, after presents had been opened and breakfast eaten, and the boys were playing with Marcus's kids who'd arrived for the afternoon portion of the celebration, Julian and Simone stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Chicago. "Who would have thought," Simone said, "that the millionaire who came to throw me out would end up being the love of my life?" "Who would have thought," Julian countered, "that the woman with 3 4-year-olds would teach me what family actually means?" "We've come a long way from that rainy November morning," Simone said. "We have," Julian agreed, "and I can't wait to see where we go from here." From behind them came the sound of their sons laughing, of family celebrating, of a life built not on obligation or circumstance, but on choice and love and showing up. Julian Cross had spent 15 years building an empire, but in one November morning on a doorstep in South Chicago, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found home.